a warm welcome. You're watching the Foreign Policy Dialogue with me, Smita Sharma, on my YouTube channel, Smita Sharma Journalist. And a quick reminder before we proceed, do press the bell icon notification for all alerts when I upload fresh content here on the channel. And I just thought that it would be interesting to talk about the gentleman who's constantly bashed in India for his foreign to his economic policy. He definitely seems to be the legendary Prime Minister who is still in command of governance in India. We are talking about Prime Minister Nehru. And of course, you see the constant politics around him from inside Parliament to outside Parliament. But it's important to keep talking about the Nehruvian style of politics, his foreign policy, his vision on the global stage that really shaped India post-partition, post-independence, and how we are today. So I'm joined here by a special guest. I have Andre Benvenuti, who is an associate professor in politics and international relations at the University of New South Wales in Australia. He essentially teaches the international history, the 20th century international history at the undergraduate and the postgraduate levels as well. Somebody who's an honorary Indian because he spends a lot of time in India going through archival material and the records as well, which I'm told are difficult to access.
A little bit.
We'll talk about it. But why am I talking to him? Because he is the author of a book which has been acclaimed, and it's a book that was released some time ago. It's called Nehru's Bandung, Non-Alignment and Regional Order in Indian Cold War Strategy. So I think today when the world is going through so much of tumult, and while your book really focuses on that Bandung conference of 1955, the lead up to it, how Nehru viewed it before the conference, after the conference. But Andre, do you think that you kind of see a déjà vu sort of a feeling where everybody today is struggling to find a new world order or a world order that makes sense?
Absolutely, because after all, 1954, when the Bandung conference took place, we are just less than 10 years after the Second World War. It's a period of great change. It's a period in which a new international system is being crafted, and the similarities are there because we are on the cusp of a new international system appearing. So there are interesting and intriguing parallels.
But, before I come back and talk about the Bandung conference, really, today, now more than ever, I mean, we talk about Nehru, we talk about non-alignment. While the current Indian government says that we are not into non-alignment, we are into strategic autonomy. Do you find really sort of very different strands of thread into these two visions of foreign policy?
Yes and no, Smita. Yes, because in a sense, strategic autonomy is, to me, it's a way of non-alignment couched in a different language, if you like. However, that's the similarity between the past and the present. However, there's also a difference because I think under this current government, there's a great willingness to strike agreements, to strike partnerships, to be unashamed about striking partnership. While under Nehru there was even sometimes a pact could pose a problem because for Nehru that would perhaps indicate India would not be necessarily 100% non-aligned. So Nehru was a little bit more reluctant into going, choosing sort of signing non-aggression pacts, for instance. Under Modie, that sort of, how to describe it, that sort of reluctance is a little bit gone out of the window. But I would say the strategic, at the end of the day, strategic autonomy is another way of calling non-alignment.
So, which brings us to a question that is often asked, because I think one of the key areas where Prime Minister Nehru is often criticized for was his understanding of China. Now, you have this conference coming up where it felt like Nehru actually did want to bring up the fault lines of China in the conference. He was a prime mover for the conference. And then you have a Zhou Enlai actually emerging as one of the stars from this conference. So you have a Nehru who wants to go for non-alignment, as you said, who did not want to choose sides. But on the other hand, he's also becoming a prime mover, but he does want to, talk about China, talk about the Afro-Asian the regional security order as well. Did you find any contradictions in the way Nehru was approaching the conference?
There were, because I think at the end of the day, if I were to criticize Nehru, is that he did misunderstand aspects of Chinese foreign policy and also the Chinese regime. So in my view, there was a misunderstanding there. But then on the other hand, I think he was trying to see whether China could be engaged. And that attempt was to be made. Now, in Australia, we say it takes two to tango. So Nehru assumed that actually the Chinese would tango with him. The reality was then when China in the late 50s again adopted a more radical line in foreign policy, there was no second person to tango with. So there are, of course, contradictions, but I think that was inevitable.
But did Nehru really go into the conference looking at non-alignment? Or in a way, he was looking at alignment when you're talking about a regional new security order?
He was still pursuing non-alignment, but in Bandung, one of the main things they tried to do was to try to create an area in this region where countries would be increasingly non-aligned. So if you like, he used the Bandung conference, or rather he tried to use the conference as a way of expanding what he called an area of peace, but we could also call it an area of non-alignment, where countries would be mostly non-aligned. They would subscribe to the principle of 5 principles peaceful coexistence, panchsheel, and therefore, yes, was a way of actually trying to break free from Cold War rigidities, the two blocks, and try to find a way of just creating a sort of safe zone.
So, you know, these were, of course, some of the key factors, whether it was the Cold War coming to an end, whether it was India also trying to find a way with Pakistan and the American-Pakistan partnership that had been shaping up. So, you know, give us a little more sense of what really was playing into Nehru's mind, because on the one hand, he did go for this conference, but we do understand that he had his hesitations also about Bandung.
He had, I'll start with your second point. He had significant hesitations because he thought that actually a conference of very different Afro-Asian countries would perhaps not provide the necessary consensus to move forward. So he was a little bit skeptical that such a conference could provide enough understanding between Afro-Asian countries to move forward. So that's the first point. The second point is that he wanted to use it, though, as a way of, again, create a more stable region and a way of, if you like, engaging China. Because he assumed that, like India, India's neighbors were all worried about China. And he assumed if China could be brought into greater contact, or to use a word of the time, exchange with a number of other countries, China would probably eventually become a sort of a stakeholder in regional security and pose no threat to the other countries. Then, of course, there's the issue of Pakistan, but I'll cover it if you're happy for me to cover it.
Yes, please. Go ahead.
The conference was also a way of try to take the sting out of the American policy of containment, and Pakistan in 1954 became pretty much fully fledged paying members of the Western Alliance system with a bilateral agreement with the United States, a mutual defense agreement with the United States, and then Pakistan entering the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization in 1954. And so, of course, Nehru felt that the Cold War was really reaching the shores of India, and Bandung was also a way of try to make everyone realize that they didn't need to ally with the United States or with the Eastern Bloc, and to some extent also minimize the threat of Pakistan.
You know, there are very interesting parallels here. In the current times, of course, you have a very, very turbulent world order and the chaos unleashed by President Trump. And you also have, once again, that hobnobbing between the US and the Pakistan, which is of concern for India. whether it's Pakistan actually agreeing to join that peace board on Gaza, or of course doing that ego massage and nominating President Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize, are there some threads from that conference that you think still apply to the way today India is going ahead with its alliances and looks at these problem areas?
I would make two quick points. Yes, there are similarities. One, it's the enduring and never-ending problem of how to deal with great powers. So that was the case then, and that's the case today. And I think in many ways, strategic autonomy or non-alignment, call it as you like, it's still a sort of the safest bet for India to pursue. Now there's another important similarity, and I think here I would raise a question more than offer a ready-made answer, because it's an extremely complicated issue. To what extent actually India can use the global south as a way of increasing its own influence, as a way of securing the outcomes that India wants in foreign policy. And there I think there's a problem, because the global south, despite some shared interest, is as divided as it was in 1954. So I'm rather skeptical that the global south could provide significant answers to India's concerns.
I think it's also a problem because the moment we talk global south, somehow we still paint a very homogenized picture, but the global south itself has not only become fractured but also so different. I mean, there are countries within the global south which are so different when it comes to their economic status compared to others, or the so-called values and beliefs when it comes to democracies or freedom. So it's really a very mix of powers and countries. So maybe we also have to relook at the way we have been defining global south.
I think we have, but also think we need to be more realistic on what the global south can offer to India. I'm not saying for a moment that on every possible issue within the United Nations or other fora, the global south could not provide a common voice or relatively similar voice on some issues, environment and so on and so forth. There's the possibility there for some collaboration. But we can't really treat the global south as a possible antidote to a number of problems, precisely for the reasons that you're outlining, that it's a group of very different countries with very different needs. Yes, there are common issues, but is the glue that keeps them somewhat uneasily together enough to produce extremely significant outcomes for India? For instance, in the security area, I think the global south doesn't really provide much of a help to India. Nonetheless, of course, as I said, in sectoral, in certain aspects, in certain sectors, on certain issues, there can be probably enough agreement to advance India's interest on the international scene.
Okay, let's rewind once again back to 1954, and in your book, as you write that the seeds of Bandung were planted in Colombo in the spring of 1954. Tell us a little bit more about what was happening then and what really was working for Nehru to become this prime mover, because at the end of the day, we are looking at a country that had come out of a bloodied partition, that had not been independent for too long, which did not have the military or the economic might that we have today, that we boast of today. So why was the world taking Nehru seriously? What was working for him?
That's a very interesting question that I think it's very pertinent today, because Nehru is getting significant flack in India, from what I can gather. But really, Nehru, in many ways, he had significant personal and political stature, but more to the point, he was the representative of a country that just become independent. And the independence of India, we should not forget it, in 1947, was really a milestone, was really the sign that European colonialism was in the last phases, in the last fag of its existence. And so India had a big country with a big population, a big culture, and potentially a significant power, had significant political stature and the kudos to play on the international scene. And many still colonized areas and new post-colonial states were looking really at India, to India rather, as an example, as well as sort of a leading voice in the developing world.
So was it really India's sort of stance on issues, the willingness to take, to have that moral compass and to take principled positions that was working to India's advantage?
Yes, because I would argue, as you actually pointed out, of course, in terms of rough indicators, in terms of economic might, military might, India was not a great power at the time, but Nehru leveraged on India historical experience, political experience, the fact that India did provide, if you like, the living symbol of the end of imperialism as a way of actually pushing Indian interest in international affairs. In a sense, it's a period that, as I said before, it's a period of great change.
Yeah.
When there's the possibility of affecting change and implementing change. And so Nehru tried to secure important strategic interest and political interest for India through, if you like, not simply moral leadership, but really through actually suasion, to try to say, well, actually, all these things don't quite work for developing countries, and perhaps we should find a different way forward. So he was trying, at the end of the day, right or wrong, to put forward a different project, not simply for India, but also for developing nations.
So why and how did Zhou Enlai emerge as this star power from the conference?
Because in a sense, he was a consummate politician. In fact, he was a virtuoso in terms of foreign policy and the way in which he related to other diplomats and foreign ministers. But in a sense, Bandung for him provided a significant stage because really for the first time, or rather for the second time, China was invited to a conference. The first one was in Geneva, the conference on Indochina and Korea in 1954. And the second one was Bandung. Those two conferences were milestones because for the first time, China was present at the table. And the novelty of having China present to the table, a big country, a threat for many nations, or was perceived as a threat by many nations in the region, made Zhou Enlai as really one of the main guys in town.
So, just the last set of questions, Andre, because you spend a substantive portion of your India travels looking into India's archival history, records. And I believe that even after the book, of course, the more digging you do, you've been you've been realizing more interesting sort of anecdotes and stories that are still emerging, and one of them being about, Nehru and Zhou Enlai's conversation with the then Australian High Commissioner's wife seated next to them.
Yes,
Tell us a little bit about, some of the interesting observations you've made, which could perhaps go into your next book.
For instance, yesterday, as I was working in the Prime Minister's Museum and Library, or as I still call it, the Nehru Museum, Library and Museum, I was actually looking at the table arrangements for the banquet between Zhou Enlai, Nehru, and the President of India, Rashtrapati Bhavan. And I could see the table arrangements, and I could see who was sitting where. And the wife of the Australian High Commissioner was sitting next to Nehru, facing Zhou Enlai. And that for me was quite interesting because actually the reporting from Delhi to Canberra by the lady's husband, Walter Crocker, was extremely accurate. And to give you one last point, when I go into the archives, of course I look for serious stuff. But then sometimes you find a brief for ministers, for instance, a profile of foreign politicians, what they like and what they don't like, where they've been educated and so on and so forth, what's their personality, what do their wife like, or what would they like as a gift. So in a sense, all this side of my research that you could regard, people would say, well, isn't it a little bit gossipy? Actually brings life to politicians, to leaders, and really it's like peering through a curtain and discovering a new world, which is unknown to us because politicians then, as they are now, are quite stage managed. And so to be able to go to the archives and looking into these things, you realize actually we see them almost as if there's no protection. Finally, you get a sense of how they discuss to each other, they talk to each other, how they behave with each other, their likes, dislikes, their sort of top secret comments.
Yeah, it's almost like being a fly on the wall and being able to listen into that conversation.
Yes, I feel like a little bit of kind of harmless spy, just peering on into other people's lives.
Yeah, this is a brilliant movie, by the way, for our audiences. If you want to watch, it's on the East and West Germany reunification. It's called Lives of Others. It's a German movie. Do watch that movie. That would be a recommendation from me. Got nothing to do with Nehru and Bandung, just a little off comment. But, so Paul Johnson, the historian, in his book in 1983 in Modern Times, he dedicates an entire chapter on what he calls the Bandung generation of leadership. And the Bandung generation of leaders, whether it's from the Middle East, from the Asian, African countries. What's one strength of the Bandung generation of leadership that you think would be required in times like today, when we have so many conflicts across the world and the world perhaps feels the most turbulent, the closest that we have come, since the Second World War?
I think unquestionably, Smita, would be the ability to talk to each other, to try to understand that all the different leaders came from very different countries, and yet they were willing to talk to each other. Now, the issue, I guess, is how you sustain this communication over time. How do you make, if you like, agreements stick over time? And I think that's the challenge for leaders then and today. But I guess the main lesson from Bandung was the fact that it's very different leaders from different cultures were willing to talk to each other. At the end of the day, without diplomacy, I wouldn't say that diplomacy is just the alpha and omega of international life, or if you like, an antidote to everything. But nonetheless, communication and diplomacy is important to try to solve contemporary problem as has been helpful at times to solve problems in the past.
You never found a glimpse of an ego in Nehru or carrying a chip on his shoulders? I mean, what keeps the Nehruvian politics still relevant globally for foreign scholars like you?
Yes, I would argue that sometimes I struggle in my academic life with Nehru, and sometimes my wife complains I'm spending too much time with Nehru rather than her. She would disagree with me, but I'm pretty sure. But in a sense, it's a complex personality. It's a personality that I came to like. But then again, there are aspects of his persona that perhaps I could say, he was a little bit of a snob, yet no time for fools. But on the other hand, he was also extremely gentle in many ways and always an engaging figure. So no one beside is perfect, so I wouldn't expect Nehru to be perfect. But it's certainly a towering figure of the 20th century, despite some of his foibles and despite some of his mistakes that he unquestionably made over time. But again, who doesn't make them?
One of those huge mistakes, of course, was his belief in China, that Hindi Chini bye bye sloganeering that happened, and then it leads to the 1962 war, being beguiled by Zhou Enlai. So despite those setbacks, that failure to read the Chinese, to be betrayed by them, you still find him visionary.
I still find him visionary, but yes, he had a misunderstanding of Chinese communism, what he stood for, what China was under Mao and Chou Enlai. So that was a big miscalculation, and of course, miscalculation that he paid very, very dearly. But nonetheless, that's an aspect of it. I still believe, though, that engaging China was something that needed to be tried. The problem, though, and I would leave it at that, is that he didn't have a plan B if and when his policy of engagement would fail. And indeed, at some point, China disagreed with peaceful coexistence, embraced a new radical line, and Nehru was left, in a sense, in a quandary. And then he didn't have a plan B.
So finally, a hypothetical question. What is one advice you think Pandit Nehru would have given to Mr. Modie today in his dealings with Donald Trump at a time when a Mark Carney is actually becoming that middle power voice at Davos, you know, where of course you have a Putin, you have Netanyahu. In these times, maybe what is an advice that Pandit Nehru would have given to Mr. Modie?
That's a hell of a tough question, Smita. Just I would say that keep India's foreign policy on course, which is we need to be able to talk to each other. We might be misunderstood. In fact, that's exactly what he said. The fact that we'll be misunderstood cannot be helped. People will try to sort of cast us in a light that we don't like. But nonetheless, we need to pursue a policy of non-alignment, which at the end of the day is strategic autonomy. But then we keep having to talk to everyone. So, I mean, in his time, he dealt with very difficult personalities. Mao Zedong, the American Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, who was a pretty tough negotiator and an uncompromising figure. So he dealt with difficult figures in his own life. But yes, I would say diplomacy, talking, and keep India's interests very clear in your mind and pursue them by remaining strategically independent.
You know, and it's very interesting that you sum up the conversation like this, because I think it's very relevant and it drives home the point that at the end of the day, however you label our policy, because of the vision of the first Prime Minister of the country, you have had in place a foreign policy which mercifully has been consistent across different governments led by different Prime Ministers. And it is a fact that has helped India actually talk to all countries, no matter how adverse their positions has been. So the tightrope walking that India is known for, and a lot of times even notorious for, whether it's between Iran and Israel, Russia, Ukraine in the current circumstances, that's something that's not happened only post-2015. It's actually a thread that's continued through the Nehruvian era of foreign policy. So just a quick conversation here with Professor Andre Benvenuti. Do look up for his book, Nehru's Bandung, Non-Alignment and Regional Order in Indian Cold War Strategy. Many thanks for joining me here for this conversation.
Thank you, Smita. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks so much.
Take
care. And thanks for tuning in. And do not forget to press that bell icon notification if you've subscribed to the channel so that you're alerted every time I upload a fresh content. That's all that we have on this episode of the Foreign Policy Dialogue. Goodbye and take care.